I'm really surprised to see everybody here. We did not expect so many people on this.
Don't let us down.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to have the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we are called to order at 6 o'clock. First of all, we are going to, gotta keep it, yeah, you know what? Somebody want to turn the air down? I don't know if it'll help. We can turn the fans down. I didn't get over here. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is roll call and return to quorum. So we've got David Humphreys, present. Terry Langton, present. Gary Jones, who's running around, is present. Lonnie Richter is present. Sandy Lester is present. And Judy Weir?
I'm here.
Good. Judy is here by phone. Bob will not be here tonight. Before we go on to, to any other business, there's a couple announcements I'm going to make. One of them is, I think people have confusion about the letter and the forms and all that. Okay. So, the forms that you got, the W-9 and the form that includes the email address that goes to our disbursement agent, that needs to be filled out by everybody. The intent is that we will know where you are after January, because we are going to have more than one check cut. It could be 2 checks, it could even possibly be 3, we don't know that yet. So, for sure, it will be 2 checks, and you'll see why when we look at the plan of dissolution tonight, but we need to know where you're going to be after January. The amount of money in the first check will be between 90 and 95%. Okay? And that is determined by the amount of money that the corporation needs to pay everything off when they, in the time that we're dissolving. So that's another thing that we don't have all the answers right now. The prospectus. This prospectus was not mailed out because we want as many people to pick it up and to be in the office that can. The prospectus is a lot of pages, and we will mail it out to anybody who wants us to mail it out to. We will email it to anyone, but we're trying to make it most efficient by having as many people as can pick it up in the office. Okay, anything else that I forgot? Oh, turn your cell phones off, please, so that they don't get interrupted.
Hey, Bonnie.
Okay.
And maybe I have to say no potential on this perspective. If this is the one for the ELF, right?
Yes.
So we're supposed to read it over and then sign it and return the signed page?
That is correct. That last signed page is what you need to sign, what you need to return, and what you are signing for is that you have received the prospectus. We're assuming that you read it, but you received the prospectus. Now, you need to understand this is the prospectus that was on file with the state of Florida. It is the prospectus that was in effect before Palm Lake became a co-op. The reason that that was used was that to write a new prospectus takes a whole process of sending it through the state and getting it approved by a lot of people and taking God only knows how much time. by taking the prospectus that was in existence and was approved and modifying it, it is already approved by the state. So
But
that,
again, for ELS, correct?
it's for ELS. In this way, everyone does not have to sign a lease before we move forward to close.
Can you explain what a perspective is?
Need a definition of a prospectus.
It's the rules and regulations and everything that is in existence from the park. The prospectus that you've got is, that you're looking at, is all of the rules that relate to rental property.
Didn't we agree to that before?
Yes, but you have to sign that you've received it.
It's changed though since then.
There've been,
The only changes that were made to the document that's been on record with the state of Florida, as Bonnie said, for 30 years, is to comport
What's this?
to the terms of the sale, so that it was clear what charges are included in the base rent, what is not included, services, etc. Understand, you say, what is a prospectus? You have one now. You have one now. You have what's called a cooperative prospectus because you're operating as a cooperative. When the cooperative is terminated and the property is sold, the cooperative is terminated, as you know, you're going to convert to a rental community. In every rental mobile home park under our Florida Mobile Home Act, there is a 723, that's the chapter reference, prospectus. The chapter of the Florida Mobile Home Act is called 723. When this property was first developed, the developer / owner had it as a rental filing with the state. And, you know, as Gary and I were talking before the meeting, there's actually one that goes back to 1985 that was filed with the State Department of Business and Professional Regulation in 1985, and then it was subsequently amended in 88. There was a secondary filing done to this prospectus to acknowledge that lots were going to be sold in cooperative ownership, and the park was going to be offered to cooperative lessees in addition to rental lessees. It's that document called a prospectus, again, that is now going to be used again because the cooperative is being terminated as voted on by the shareholders, and you're converting back to a rental community. So that document has been on record with the state for 30 years. Bonnie says, in answer to Judy's question, yeah, it's the ELS document. Not entirely accurate, actually. It's your document, and it only has been modified to take effect when ELS closes on the purchase, should that occur. And you know, at that point, you guys are going to be renters. Now, why are you signing it? Because, as you know, as we've gone through the process with the workshops and discussions and so forth, everyone is aware that there was a lease that's in those prospectus documents. And initially, the transaction contemplated everyone signing a new lease. There were a lot of questions in workshops about the lease form, about signing that lease, about am I stuck for a year, can I get out earlier than a year? Anybody remember all this? Anybody that attended those workshops? I see a lot of nodding heads and hands. I think you were at those workshops. And, you know, it would have been quite a task to try to get 612 shareholders to sign a prospectus. And so, in lieu of that, we were able to negotiate with ELS that, sign a lease, that what we would do is simply hand out the prospectus, which has the lease in it. And we were successful in negotiating that as long as a receipt acknowledging that the shareholder has received that prospectus and lease form, that there won't be a signature necessary. The signature goes on the receipt of delivery. So you can go by the office and pick it up at your leisure, you can sign for it, but that receipt is essentially your drink ticket. If you have that receipt, and I'm going to answer questions later. This is not intended to be a question and answer session. We're going into a board meeting a second. But Judy is on the board, she asked the question. After this is asked and answered, we're going into session. So I just want to say, afterwards we can answer questions. I just want to say that in answer to Judy and to clarify the gentleman on the floor who asked the question, that we are going to get receipts from each shareholder, and that receipt, as they say, is your drink coupon or your ticket for your disbursement checks. Now, I heard someone question, why is there 2 or 3 potential checks? I'll just say quickly and then we'll move on. You know, that's always been discussed and always been intended. We've always known that there would be a holdback that is for contingencies and for expenses, and we're going to be going through a dissolution and wind up of this corporation post-closing. And so after that, the second disbursement can come out to the shareholders. So there would be at least 2 checks, as was mentioned. You know, the thought is that there'll be between 90 and 95% disbursement of the full amount in the first check. So the holdback would be a minor portion of the total dividend to go out to each shareholder. All right, I hope that helps. I'm here afterwards if we need to discuss it a little bit further. Timeline in what way? When a closing occurs and so forth? Well, for those of you that weren't here at the last board meeting, and just to refresh the board, we are presently in the inspection period. The buyer has through November 1st, which is a Friday, to determine if it is going forward with the transaction. Everything has been positive to date. We're approaching, today being the 11th, we're approaching the middle of the month. There is a right of extension. Either party, our side as seller, their side as buyer, can extend the closing for 30 days. That would put us, if we don't close as originally contemplated in November 20th is the date that's sort of circled before Thanksgiving. Then it would move out 30 days to potentially December 20th, which is right before Christmas, right? So the goal is to possibly close in November, and if not, to close in December. But it isn't contemplated to be any longer than that. And as we sit here right now, we're in need of accomplishing our goals to be able to get through the inspection period by November 2nd, which is anyone that wants to modify their share or has lost their share or needs to pay off a loan. You know, we're dealing with those issues now, and documents are available for everybody now to do that. And we've had a couple meetings on that, including our last board meeting where we talked about it. And we had a workshop. So that's where we sit right now. Timeline for those of you that are here tonight to pick up a check, I'm sorry, that's not happening.
Take a personal check.
We'll wait and see whether or not we can get through this inspection period with the buyer without an extension. But they could extend, and if they do, then we'll be into December before there would be a closing.
Okay, the only other thing I wanted to mention, if you look at the lease, remember that the lease that is published in the prospectus is the lease that would be used for anybody who will be planning to be in this park all of the time that ELS has it. So there's a lot of blanks, but those blanks would be likely filled in different for you as a shareholder than it would be for somebody that came off the street to buy. This prospectus is, and the rules and the lease, they're not just for the people that are here today. They're for the people that are here today and the people that are here down the road. So, okay, the next thing we need to do is we need to, actually I need to add something to the agenda. We don't have any old business on here, and we need to add an item for approval of minutes. And so, can I have a motion for that?
I'd make a motion to add that.
Okay, that will be the minutes. The minutes for approval will be August 2nd, September 13th, and September 15th. So I have a motion on the table.
I'll second.
Second by Gary. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, so we will modify the agenda to include the approval of minutes. And the next thing we're gonna go into is approval of minutes. Everyone on the board has had the minutes.
Bylaw amendment?
No, the minutes. And, yeah, the last page, they're on the last pages of your handout too. And so I'm hoping everyone has had a chance to read it. Can we waive reading of the minutes and can I have a motion to approve? Okay, so I'm gonna clarify the motion, and then I'll have you move it. So everyone has had a chance to read the minutes. We are going to waive the reading of the minutes and approve the minutes for August 2nd, the closed meeting on September 13th, and the meeting on September 15th. Okay, and is that what you want to move, Dave?
Yeah.
Okay, Dave moved to a motion to approve those minutes. Have a second?
I'll second.
Second.
Okay, we got second. All of those in favor?
Aye.
Any further, anybody opposed? Okay, those minutes are approved. Now, we're gonna go on to the other agenda items. The first one is the proprietary lease, the change of the amendment for proprietary lease termination. I'm sorry, the bylaw amendment that we are proposing for the change in the proprietary lease termination. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, we've already circulated that amendment among the board. We've had an opportunity to talk about it. Unless there's any questions from the board, then a motion can be made.
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
Why are we doing this?
Judy, I think you saw a reply to an email that I had sent to you on this. The reason it is being done is to make it perfectly clear that as the cooperative is terminated, as voted on by the board and the shareholders, that the leases of record will be terminated without the necessity of going to the expense of recording against every lot, incurring document production for every lot, and also making it abundantly clear that those leases are no longer on the public record, which means that you can have clear title, it's a title insurance requirement into the buyer. So this is a contractual requirement, and just to make it clear, on the public record against every lot, there is a proprietary lease. So you are doing this amendment under your bylaw provisions that allow for the board of directors to amend the bylaws. 75% approval of the board is required to amend the bylaws, and this bylaw amendment is in furtherance of the sale for that reason.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and if you look at the amendment, which you've had a copy of it, I know you've read, and you look under 5F, it speaks specifically to this being in furtherance of the sale of the community.
Okay.
I also,
And if in fact there is no sale of the community, which it's always a possibility, but if for any reason there isn't a sale of the community, this would not apply. So it only applies, to make that clarification, the event of sale of the community.
And that's because we had nothing in the actual bylaws.
That's right.
Regarding it.
Correct.
Okay. I thought I was good, but I didn't.
You were right.
okay.
I would like to make a motion that we add paragraph F to Article 8 of the bylaws. Paragraph F will read, sale of the community, the sale of the property owned by the corporation and the termination of the cooperative pursuant to a majority vote of the Board of Directors and a majority vote of the shareholders in favor of the same.
Need a second?
I second that.
Yes, second.
Terry second.
I'm sorry.
Sandy's over there.
Terry second, I'm sorry. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous, so that is 6 out of 7 board members. The motion's passed.
Okay.
Now we're gonna go on to the plan of dissolution. And I'm gonna let you discuss.
Okay. And every board member has a copy of the plan of dissolution, liquidation, and termination of Palmwood Cooperative Inc. If you have it in front of you, you can turn to it, and I will run through this plan. Remember that the purpose of this plan is for the orderly dissolution and liquidation of this corporation known as Palm Lake Cooperative Inc. As this property is sold, the cooperative will be in receipt of proceeds to be distributed to its members. And therefore, there needs to be a plan set in place for that. Pursuant to statute, we have before you a plan to adopt by this board that will allow for that orderly dissolution and liquidation of the corporation. This has been discussed and this has been worked toward since the beginning of the transaction. So, at each paragraph, as you see in the particular document, there is a heading, and I'll go through each heading and I'll give you, you've all read it, so you don't need to read it out loud, the gist of it for those that are attempting as well. Number 1 speaks to the formation of your corporation and the filing with the Department of State in June of 1989. Number 2 speaks to the fact that you have members who own all of the outstanding membership interest in the co-op. That means issued shares. Number 3, the vote took place on August 2nd of the shareholders to sell the property owned by the co-op to ELS for $70 million and authorize the board of directors to consummate that sale by written contract, to be negotiated by the board, and to terminate the co-op in conjunction with the sale. Number 4 references the contract approval. The board of directors participated in the negotiation of the contract and held a meeting, a special board meeting, on the 15th of September wherein they approved the execution of that contract. The contract was executed and made effective September 17th, 2018 by both the co-op and ELS. Number 5, the plan approval. This plan is considered adopted once approved by the board of directors. And it speaks to the fact that the board is here tonight at this special meeting on October 11th to vote on approval of this plan. Number 6, cessation of business. Approving this plan, as this paragraph states, does not interfere with or in any way stop the co-op from continuing to do business. To the contrary, you continue to do business, as it states, through the date of the closing. And only upon the closing would there be a cessation of business. However, business would continue as necessary to protect the value of the assets, to wind up the business and affairs of the corporation, to pay debts, and distribute the net proceeds of sale as patronage dividends in accordance with this plan to the shareholders. Number 7, following the adoption, and this is entitled Sale of Assets, following the adoption of this plan, the board of directors are authorizing itself to dissolve, liquidate, or terminate the contract, the co-op, should the contract close. Should it not close, then this plan would not be implemented. Again, this is repeating what is essentially stated above. It's only terminated upon the closing of the contract. And you have the power to adopt the necessary resolutions and execute the necessary documents for the purpose of effecting the sale, including termination of all proprietary leases. Number 8, payment of liabilities. All known liabilities, or any ascertained liabilities, they may be liabilities that aren't known at this point but are determined later, they have to be properly provided for and paid. So there will be set aside a reserve fund, the amount estimated by the board of directors, for the payment of expenses and contingent liabilities, including any taxes or other dissolution costs. And then the final net sum can be distributed to the shareholders. Liquidation is number 9. Following the sale of the assets and the payment of all liabilities stated above, the board of directors is authorized to transfer and distribute the net cash proceeds of the sale, together with other available cash remaining to the shareholders of the co-op. It is estimated that each shareholder shall receive approximately $110,000 in redemption of their share as a patronage dividend. I want to remind the board that the board has had the CPA firm of Baggett Rudiman review the audit of your auditors and also your cash position and also your asset list in late spring, early summer. I think they concluded it actually around June. And you have a letter to that effect, Gary, which actually shows the potential for distribution higher than that. Although there were some financial irregularities that have been worked through. And so that is where that figure came from. I remind the board and those in attendance that the vote that was initially to take place in May on this transaction was moved to August so that that could be accomplished and so that disclosures could go out to the shareholders that corrected the original estimate of $115,000. I caution anyone from the board or otherwise from going out in the community or suggesting to anyone that there is a set sum of $110,000 that's being distributed. That's not what we're saying this evening, and that's not what has been said previously. But it is estimated to be in that range, could be higher, could be a little bit lower. I believe the estimate that went out and was voted on gave a range from 108, Gary, perhaps, and up based on the CPA's estimates. Everything, however, shows to this point that the estimate holds very true, and this number of 110 is placed in this particular document based on where it looks as of today. Dissolution. As soon as practical, after the transfer and liquidation is complete, the co-op will be formally dissolved in accordance with the laws of the state of Florida. The board of directors has the power to adopt resolutions and execute documents. It makes the filings as necessary to effect both the termination and dissolution of the co-op corporation. Shareholder interest is number 11. In exchange for the cash proceeds that represent his or her distribution, each shareholder must deliver back its original shareholder certificate, become a leaseholder under Chapter 723 Florida statutes, receive the Chapter 723 prospectus, execute a lease addendum applicable for its tenancy. That is actually going to be a prospectus receipt now rather than a lease addendum, which is good. And undertake such other reasonable action as required in furtherance of the sale of this plan. Approval of this plan shall be deemed to include the shareholder being required to pay any pro rata basis of claims against the co-op not barred by law, but limited and not limited to claims for any type of taxes that come back to the corporation because the shareholder doesn't pay their required taxes, or any other claims that could be made as a result of the shareholder or otherwise. Number 12, copy of this plan is authenticated by the officer's certificate and filed with the Florida Department of State. Procedurally, what will happen is when the transaction closes, the day of closing, the recording of the documents, including the deed of transfer and other documents, will include a document that terminates the cooperative. Notification, well, that document gets recorded in the records, obviously, of this county. Notification of that termination is also given to the state of Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, because as noted in paragraph 1, you know, that's who corporations file their articles of incorporation with in our state, Department of State. And so when they get notice of that, they know the cooperative has been terminated. Division of Land Sales, condominiums, and mobile homes will also get a copy of that. Corporation will effectively stay in place for a year after closing, and this board of directors will continue to be on the board. And there will continue to be, even after the sale, work to be performed and duties to be exercised. And every shareholder should appreciate the fact that this board will continue to work for you even after closing. As when we talk about a second check, we talk about paying liabilities, we talk about going through the dissolution process and a liquidation process of a corporation. It's a time-consuming process, and you're very fortunate to have a board here that has agreed to continue on in that capacity. And they will continue doing that. Even though the co-op has been terminated, remember the co-op is the form of business that this corporation presently exercises, but it will continue on as a corporation, just won't be owning these assets and acting as a cooperative any longer. It'll simply be a for-profit corporation that is in a dissolution process, winding up the affairs of that corporation for as long as it takes for the benefit of the shareholders, and filing its final tax returns, you know, taking care of any contingent claims for monies that come in that need to be paid out, making sure all the prorations that are done, and all the payments that are required are made, and that everybody that is a shareholder has received their checks and done everything they're supposed to do as a shareholder. You know, I can't begin to explain to you the process in terms of how much work there is right now. Every board member here is aware of the fact that we have hundreds of people who are looking to change their share ownership. We've had claims come out of the woodwork, as this board knows, for people who say they are actually the owner of the share, even though their name may not appear on it. We have people who are claiming to be partners with other people, even divorcees that are apparently ready to get remarried again. So it has become very interesting. And you know, when you have a community of 612 people, multinational, interesting group of people, it becomes a very, and there's $70 million on the table. It should be no surprise that it becomes a hot topic around here. So we must have all the shareholder documentation done before closing, but we'll certainly look forward to some excitement post-closing, and no doubt we'll have some squaring up to do after that in terms of certain shareholder claims and other potential issues. So we'll see how that goes. In the meantime, it's reasonable to expect that. We have, as the board knows, engaged a professional distribution company, agent that will be involved in assisting the board to make certain that all the records are correct and all the proceeds are distributed correctly, so that there won't be any mistakes or complications that can't be handled. All right, so that is the plan of dissolution and liquidation and termination of Palm Lake Cooperative Inc. in a nutshell. I can open this up for any questions of the board, and after answering those, or if there are none, then we're prepared for a vote to approve this plan. It takes a 50% vote of the board to approve the plan. Any questions of the board? Seeing none or hearing none. This is simply for the board. Any questions? Judy? You're good?
I'm good this time.
Okay. All right, thank you, Judy. Then let's go ahead. Is there anyone who wants to make a motion?
I would like to make a motion that the plan of dissolution and liquidation and termination of Palm Lake Cooperative Inc., as just explained by David and as printed in front of you, be accepted by the board.
If you'll need a second.
I second that motion.
Jerry has seconded the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
So,
Nope.
sounds like it
Plan passed with unanimous vote of the president. Yeah, we will have to sign it, but he's got the copy.
I'm going to pass it, Al. If you could use blue ink, if you don't have blue, I have one for you. And you get the copies, but this way the original will show the blue ink.
Okay, so we will be signing it. There.
Okay,
Somebody sign for me and like initially sign it.
No, you'll sign it, but we'll, when are you back? Oh, not till November? Okay. We'll have you sign it and send it back to us, and your signature back to us, if that's okay. You can scan and email it in.
did you hear, Judy? You can scan it and email it in? Okay?
We have your vote recorded, and you'll need to, of course, do minutes of this meeting, and in your next meeting, you'll approve those minutes.
He's doing it.
Okay.
We have Keith here doing minutes. Okay, is there anything else in discussion on the board? The next meeting we are planning to have is a very brief meeting on October 29th. That's a Monday at 6 o'clock. And we will be dealing with a termination of a share that needs to occur because we have found somebody who has, the family is deceased and they have abandoned the home and we are not able to find any heirs. So we need to do that, so that's kind of a procedural thing so that we can clear it up, because we do need to provide all of the shares at closing. So that will be the main thing that we'll be doing on the 29th.
What time is that going to be?
6. I'll send you an email again.
6 o'clock.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
If you could kindly keep, go
Okay.
ahead and take this.
All right, then we'll listen. Okay, I have a motion by David Humphries to adjourn the meeting. I have a second by Sandra. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody? Nobody's opposed to that. And so we will adjourn at 6:40. Now, we will open up for some questions. Please give your name and your lot number with a question.
Ed, lot 1225. David, could you possibly explain this to me? I read the letter of intent, and I look at the exemptions that you got in the letter of intent, and then I look at the ones that will not prevail, carried over after reading the perspectives. And I'm a little confused, more specifically about the shareholder items. And they consist of, on the letter of intent, they consist of the $675 on the basic rent, the cable, the sewer, and the lawn maintenance. Okay, now, I read the perspectives, and the way I read it, and I may be wrong, but the new owners have the liberty of giving a 90-day notice, and they can terminate anything of that nature because that is not binding according to the letter of intent, and all I've got to look at is the perspectives because I don't know what else is included in there, and maybe you can clarify that.
Ed, every item that you mentioned is contained in a closing document that will be signed at closing. The prospectus form that you have is a document that was created 30 years ago. The rent amount is not in it, never was. Items that are negotiated to be included in your rent are not necessarily in that document. But I can assure you that they're in binding documents that will be signed at closing. Your board has seen them, and Gary has worked extensively on helping negotiate the cooperative agreement, which is a document, a contract between the co-op and the buyer to carry forward the provisions of the letter of intent. We will be recording in the public records a declaration of restrictions to the exhibit of the contract. And the declaration of restrictions contains provisions like that continue forward. So your rent of $675, by example, that includes sewer but doesn't include water, your guaranteed rent caps and the assumability of any buyer of your home to those rent caps, cable, basic cable being included in your rent, landscaping, compliance with rules, the things that you're seeing in that letter of intent all have been checked off in binding documents that are to be executed at closing between the seller and the buyer. They are part of the formal contract. You have a letter of intent. They're part of the formal contract. They'll be in closing documents, and where appropriate, will be recorded in the public records as well. So it's not a bad question. It's actually a very good question. And it is understandable why you would ask it. I don't believe you were at the last meeting. Perhaps you were. You were. Were you at the meeting where the contract was signed?
No.
It was a Saturday morning meeting, and you know, while we went through portions of the contract, we spoke about the fact that there is a confidentiality provision that's in it. And the reason for that is, if you look in that letter of intent which you have in front of you, the buyers make sure that they carry that forward in the contract. But this board has seen all those things. And let me say that you have a working board. You don't have a board of directors that isn't working. You're very fortunate to have a CAM on your board, 2 CAMs here. And so together we have all gone through to make sure every one of those items are checked off and covered.
All right, that's fine, but we don't have all that information available to us, so that's why I asked the question.
And the question is absolutely legit.
Thank you.
You bet.
Over there, Gary, way in the corner.
And in the back.
Good evening, Tony Zumo, 494. This is directed towards David and the board. I have a question on our certificates. I have a certified copy from the state. On the certificate, it states RSL. Can you explain that to me? ROS.
You're saying on your certificate,
On my
after the
certificate.
name, it must say ROS.
Right.
I would imagine that's rights of survivorship.
Okay.
So that means that if one party dies,
Which my book had written down.
then the other party listed on that certificate, if there's or parties, would have all the rights in that certificate as the survivor.
Okay. My point to the board was, this obviously wasn't looked at when they did the vote, not that mine would matter, but they also didn't count my vote. So
That is correct, your vote was not counted.
Well, I'm trying to find out why, if I was the sheriff.
Okay, you want me to address that?
Sure.
Does Gary want to address it?
It's legal issues.
Because it was being contested, I'd rather
Right.
have you address it.
I'd be happy to address it. In your case, and by the way, whether you're, I think this is important for you to know particularly, but everybody needs to know this.
That's what we're doing.
There were 92 votes that were not counted. And I believe, Gary, but I believe almost all of those were yes votes. There may have been one or two that weren't counted. They would have been a no. All 92 were effectively no votes because they could not be counted as yes votes. All right? And the reason why 92 votes had to be set aside and not counted varied. There was different reasons for different people. But in your particular case, we had notice from your sisters that they were contesting this. So that meant, and a letter from one of them hired a lawyer to write a letter to this
Which I'm
board.
still dealing with. However,
That lawyer wrote a letter that stated that they were contesting your ownership and to not count your vote. All right, so with that in hand, hold on, with that in hand, we had to say, all right, you know, we can't walk into what is turning into some sort of an estate claim, I guess, by your sisters.
now they put it before the state law, this is telling me it's mine.
Yeah, I know, but you have your sister saying something else, so we can't
That should
get
have
it.
nothing to do with the
But
vote.
that's what I want to get across to everybody, is the fact that we didn't count your vote does not mean, or any of the 92 people, does not mean that those people don't get a check, or that 92 people don't. I don't want anyone to think if your vote wasn't counted, that means you don't get a disbursement. That is a separate and distinct situation. And you called me, and we've talked about your situation, and you said you were hopefully resolving it.
We didn't talk about this.
But it depends on if you can still get it resolved. Remember, I said to everyone earlier in talking with the board that, you know, there's been a lot of interesting situations out here. Mr. Zumo's in one of them. You know, hopefully these things get resolved before the checks go out. If not, your check would be, your particular disbursement would be held up. But nobody's gonna get the money until it's resolved for your particular situation.
So in other words, thank you.
We can talk about your situation without taking up everybody's time, but I don't want everybody here to think, boy, if my vote wasn't counted, do I get the check or not? That's apples and oranges. Does everyone understand that? That's apples and oranges.
Tony, nothing against you, but we, that night when we're counting votes, we tried to err on the side of being very conservative. So if your thing was contested, we didn't want to count the vote in case whatever the resolution was against you. So we
That's
just
right.
erred on that side.
And there were some votes that weren't counted for simple mistakes. And it didn't have to do with, you know, necessarily a legal contest or what you're in the middle of. It could have just been a simple mistake, like they didn't, you know, sign the proxy or forgot to put, you know, only part of the proxy was filled out, or certain things like that.
Or made yourself this proxy.
Who's next?
Oh, I'm sorry.
There's
Where
a
am I
lady,
seeing?
just a lady
Way
back
over there, and then I'll come to this side.
I have a question on the dissolution of the corporation, the Gap accounting, and the patronage distribution. What accounting firm will be handling that?
Okay, I'm going to repeat the question because they won't be able to hear that on the video. The question was on the accounting, on the dissolution, on all of those things, what accounting firm did we use? You want me to answer it?
Sure.
We used Baggett Ruderman, and there were letters sent out. Actually, the mailing that's sent out right now has a letter from them with their information and address, and phone number, and all that. And that letter is about the tax situation for U.S. and non-U.S. taxpayers. They are an accounting firm that has dealt with this situation of co-ops selling in the past for many years.
When I called them, because my mom got the package, and when I called them, they said they didn't have anything to do with distribution of checks. The only thing they did
That's
was
correct.
tax.
No, they're,
Go ahead.
yeah, let me say that they aren't the distribution agent. They're the accounting firm. The distribution agent is a different corporation that distributes the checks. And that information was in the package as well. They're going to be handling the distribution of the funds. That is not an accounting function. The accounting function, the filing of the tax return and doing the work that you just described, is being done by Baggett Ruderman, and the other corporation is doing the distribution of the checks and the gathering of the shares and making certain that the shareholder and all distributees are signing W-9 forms and taking very good care to keep records on that so that no distribution goes to anyone that there isn't a W-9 form. They will also be dealing with the Canadian population and making certain that they get their Canadian form equivalent, which is an I-10 form filled out, and then that they withhold 15% of proceeds as required under the Internal Revenue Code for any Canadian distribution. So, you know, it's a combined team effort of a number of different professional firms together with your board and management that's working on that, ma'am. So
That is in your packet, and you'll see that's MCN.
John McNaughton was here at the September 13th meeting. I don't know if you were here on the 13th. If you had been, you would have met him. 15th, excuse me, on the 15th, which was a Saturday. There is a video of that, if you'd care to watch it, that gives you some more information that you can certainly look at.
Okay, Dwight?
Dwight Cornell, 1331. I'm simple-minded. I need to know two things. On the form that says we have to send to PLS, apparently on the West Coast, this possible package, and the W-9. When do we send it and where do we send it?
Okay, none of it goes to
Excuse me,
PLS.
Mike, somebody has music playing, it's lovely, but we need to turn it off
Let's
because we
turn off the
can't hear
phone.
it. If anybody can name that tune, please do. All right, Dwight.
First of all, it does not go to ELS.
Well, where does it go?
Where it goes is, there are two ways to do it. You can actually give all that information to the office. You can leave it there,
Both of them?
both of them.
That's all I need to know.
Or you can, or the other place that you were sending it to, that is where a disbursement agent is, John McNaughton. That's what that is. Leave it in the office is easier.
But I can take both of those forms, sign them, give them to the office.
All of them.
All I need
You
to
can
know.
sign the prospectus there also. Anybody else have a question? They can be emailed. They can be emailed if you scan them, but if you, just be sure when you scan documents that that the whole document gets scanned.
All right, we are going to hand out one check tonight. We are going to hand out one check.
Just had a quick
Just
question.
a second, Robert, I'm gonna answer. The email address is on the bottom of the form from John McNaughton. All of that information, if you wanted to do something other than stop it in the office, and for the people on the video, you should have gotten a letter, or I'm hearing the Canadians are not getting it yet, but on the bottom of that letter, there is information from John McNaughton. He's asked for your email address, he's asked for some other, the W-9, and all of that has where you can email it or where you can mail it. Okay, now to Carl.
Yeah, Carl Baroni, lot 528. Could you define the expenses? You guys are saying there's expenses that have to be paid, that's why you're holding back money. And what is it, where is that money coming from? Is that coming from the reserves or from the cash that we had? Is that what's going on?
I don't have a list of your expenses. You have recurring expenses every month. You have, for example, some taxes that have to be paid, corporate taxes. You've got accounting work that has to be done. So you'll have some professional fees in that way. All closing costs get paid by the buyer. So there are no expenses there. But as you go through, you'll get bills. Let's say this transaction closes in November, on November 20th, as is hoped. Then even though you no longer own the property in December, there are going to be bills coming in December, possibly even in January. The corporation gets a water bill for common area. I don't know if you get that monthly or quarterly. You have people that work out here that will attempt to gather as many service provider bills and other things that get paid as of closing. But what happens normally is you need about 30 to 60 days to pay all of your accounts out that you have. These are recurring business accounts, but you're not going to have any operating expenses after closing. You're just going to be catching up for things. But I will tell you, when you say, what about an expense? So for example, if someone, and we just had this happen with another co-op that sold, that after the closing, a claim came in saying that they had slipped and fell, and that they wanted the corporation to pay them money for the fall. I don't want anyone out here to get any ideas, by the way, and I'm claiming they're slipping and falling, but when things like that happen, they have to get resolved before all the money can be dispersed out. So those are the types of things that could be looked at. And the statute provides for a 12-month period for dissolution because of things like that. We give the protection to the corporation, the shareholders for a period of time to be sure. So certainly that is what's anticipated here.
So I guess what I don't understand is, I've been to a couple of closings. When you close, everything should be settled at that closing. Any expenses, everything.
Without a doubt, everything is paid at closing that is known. And we prorate at a closing, just like you would if you sold your house, whatever can be prorated between the parties. But let me give you an example, real estate taxes. Real estate tax bills come out in November. They're going to get prorated, and so I think we're going to be in real good shape on the taxes. But that's an item that sometimes needs to be readjusted after closing. There could be some differential, so a little more money comes back to the corporation or a little more money has to go out. It's not uncommon. There could be something in the utilities arena that needs to get reprorated. But we fully expect to have all of those items, Carl, paid for at closing. There's no, as a matter of fact, and I don't think you were at the meeting where this was discussed, but it's been discussed in workshops too. And I want to repeat that the corporation is actually not just paying all the expenses at closing, like you're suggesting, but also paying rent for the following month. If we close in November, the December rent is being paid for every shareholder so that the shareholders don't have to start paying rent out here until January. And So there's a lot getting paid at closing, and that'll be, that rent payment, why are we doing that? Does anyone remember why?
Nice to us.
Because you don't have your check yet. And it wouldn't be fair to you as a shareholder to get a check for a $675 rent. Ed, is that the rent? $675. And not have your check yet to pay it. So you get your check 3 weeks after closing, you can then pay your rent. So those are not just our expenses getting paid at closing, but some additional funds as well for the benefit of the shareholder.
Thank you.
You bet.
Just that, just for another example though, I was involved in the closing of Palm City Christian Church in December 2017. And this last week, we got a bill because we didn't submit a proper water sample for Martin County Water District in June. So these bills do come out of nowhere.
I got one more, I'm gonna take one more.
I'm glad that you mentioned water because as most of you know, and certainly anyone on this board who's been on the board knows, the utility situation in Riviera is bad, and that's probably the right word. And so, you know, will we have all known matters to prorate at closing? We hope so, but they're very non-responsive, and, you know, if anything needs to be paid post-closing, we will.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Pat, is this on? No. Pat Colangelo, 1184. I just have a question and I'm a little confused about. I have my nephew here living with me for 35 years. His mother passed away. I was reading today in the papers that I got from the office that I think I read that he has to be registered or something. Would I have a problem with him?
No, you won't have any problem. For one thing, everything that exists today, it will exist under ELS. So he is an approved resident here today, and that will carry on under ELS. Again, this is why we've talked about, this is a prospectus that you're reading, you know, is from 30 years ago. We're going forward.
Some of it doesn't apply to boilerplate, but that, you would never have a problem.
Thank you so much.
Oh, any unapproved residents, though, who are living here are not approved. We know that we have unapproved residents that we...
Squatters.
Yeah, that are squatters, that we're working on getting rid of, but they're not approved. Okay, I only want to take a couple more questions here. Go ahead and back.
Harry Bernhardt, lot 1337. If we're on automatic debit, are y'all gonna handle that, or I just need to bring a cancel check over?
That ELS does that. I don't know. They'll notify you. They'll be sending a letter, but I don't know any more than that.
And more importantly, are we charging the Canadians that amount of export taxes?
That's that's what he was talking about with the distribution, this disbursement, that comes out of their check before they get it.
I thought we had to check with Mr. Trump. That was
Oh, that was a joke, okay. I take everything seriously. Yeah, oh, you're talking about a tariff, okay. Give Jill, or Ed, that's fine. Ed can answer, then Jill, then we're done.
I get just a quick question. Ed Digger, 1256. On the sample W9, item 5 says, enter the address that you will be in January 2019. We will be here in January 2019, but all of our taxes are in our home state.
That doesn't matter. This is for a delivery of the next check. Now, if I were you, I would put both addresses so that you have your address here and your address when you're up north, because we don't know when another check might be cut.
Thank you.
Should we notify the office if we change our address?
Sure, we'll want you to notify the office, but this is information for the disbursement people, and just remember, the office will be ELS then. So we want the man writing the check to have the right address for you. Go to Jill, and that's the last question.
Okay, my name is Jill Whitburn, 734.
Both addresses down.
I don't have a question, I have a statement. I filled out all my paperwork, I took it over to the office. The office would not take the smaller, the one that goes to Tampa or where it goes JM.
Yeah, because he.
They said they only take the 1099s.
Okay, we'll get it so that they all can be dropped off at the office.
You can always go to Gary's house.
Thank you.
And if you go to, Gary would appreciate you coming over in the evening, especially if you want. Dinner time, bring something though. You gotta bring something, a cookie or something, but he'll see you anytime. Well,
Get out of here. Okay, wait.
This is my right address, but I never received any documents in regard of this. And I was wondering if I had to receive my check.
Okay, first of all, it might be, some people just got them today.
I never received any document related to this.
Did you check with Debbie to be sure that?
I will do tomorrow.
Yeah, do that. Because sometimes you think they get the right address and they don't.
Julie, I think you've been cut out, so just forget about it. You're out, Julie.
Let's do it.